So this, I think, is going to be a bit of a controversial video, but I felt like, given the climate in our country, something needed to be said about this. And I am by no means the only person that feels this way. There are millions of us who feel the same, and even though we're not as vocal as abortion advocates, we're here, and we want to live in a just nation where the right to life and the weakest and most vulnerable amongst us are protected, and where the right to life is honored. And I'm certainly not alone. There are many, many others in this country, and it's time that we speak out because really the overturning of Roe versus Wade is a line in the sand. The states of the United States of America and the people of those states have a choice. It's a test, really, and there are going to be consequences for how we choose. Human life is important, and God is going to judge those states that continue with the wicked practice of abortion, which is murder of an innocent unborn child. And I believe that God is going to bless those states that choose by faith to honor human life. And so this video is about how abortion is evil under all circumstances. On a recent news article in the comments section, I saw someone posting who said that, well, of course we're against abortion, but we still allow abortion in cases of rape and incest and risk to the life of the mother, because you'd just have to be crazy if you didn't allow abortions for those three things. Well, actually, let me say this. This is God's perspective. Abortion is evil under all circumstances, period. Yes, even in cases of a pregnancy caused by rape or by incest, even in cases of risky pregnancies, which could be a risk to the life of the mother. And we're going to break this down and explore this today. So, firstly, here are the biblical principles about human life and children. God created this earth realm to be inhabited by humanity, and God created humanity in his own image. Now, today, because of sin, that image is tainted and broken, but it's still there, albeit in a marred form. But human life is valuable, and this is why the sixth commandment is "Thou shalt not kill," which that word in context means murder. Thou shalt not commit murder of another human being. God told humanity to be fruitful, to multiply, and to fill the earth. And God's not a fool. He put enough resources in this earth realm to support a huge human population. Thomas Malthus, the economist who put forth the idea that resources were scarce, and so eventually the population would outgrow the resources available, leading to famine and hardship. Frankly, he didn't know what he was talking about. And I'm not going to get off on that rabbit trail, but if anyone's interested, just say something in the comments, and maybe I'll do a little video on Thomas Malthus and his Malthusian fallacy. There's plenty of food, plenty of resources. Humanity's problem is sin, and human sin causes a management problem. Those who govern and rule over us are not good managers of the resources of humanity. Anyway, moving on. The Bible says quite clearly that God knew us before we were formed in the womb. This is why many Bible-believing Christians hold that life begins at conception. That's the first point that we can observe it. Life begins at conception. At conception, you have an egg and a sperm cell joining together, forming a zygote, an embryo, and that new organism, that new human life, is genetically distinct from either mom or dad. That's what real science tells us. Genetically distinct from either mom or dad. Now let's look at this Bible verse here real quick because this is incredibly deep. Psalm 139:15. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Uh, this speaks to the omniscience of God, an omniscience which goes many levels deeper and beyond what we can even conceive. Now, this is incredibly weird. You might look at this verse and say, what in the world? People aren't wrought or made in the lowest parts of the earth. And there's that word curiously there. The idea of marvelous or wondrous or in an ultimately unknowable way. And what does this actually mean? That the psalmist was created in secret places, curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth, and his substance was not hid from God. Well, this is talking about God's foreknowledge going back far, far beyond pregnancy even beginning, to where the elements making up the body of of this person, the psalmist here, those elements were still in the earth, deep, buried away, and God knew down to that level of detail that those elements would eventually come together in various ways. They'd be, absorbed by certain plants. Um, a fruit tree, for example, its roots would run deep and would bring in those nutrients from the soil, and that fruit tree would be consumed, and those elements would be integrated into this unborn child in the womb. God knew this process from beginning to end, down to the most infinitesimal molecule and how it would combine with others to build up in a very mysterious and miraculous way this human being, the psalmist. And none of this was hid. His substance was not hid from God. God knew this down to the most minute details. And the Bible also says that God knows every hair on our heads, that they are numbered. This is the foreknowledge and insight of God, and it's ultimately incomprehensible to us because we are finite. But a new human life begins at conception. This is a biblical principle, and the Bible has a lot to say about children. Here's a few other biblical principles. Children are a blessing from God. If God has chosen to give you a child, you are blessed. And you're going to be held accountable for how you choose to nurture that life or whether you tear it down, destroy it, and ruin it. It's a gift. And as I say this, I can't help but think of my aunt and uncle who weren't able to have kids. And I remember growing up as a kid, my parents would tell me, well, maybe this will be the year, maybe this is going to be the summer where you'll have a new cousin because your aunt and uncle, they're going to try to adopt again. And year after year, they tried to adopt here in the U.S., they tried to adopt kids from other countries, and kept coming across hurdles and roadblocks, and ultimately it didn't work out for them. Now, God had other things uh, in store for my aunt and uncle, I believe. God has been able to use them in other ways because they didn't have kids, and they had more time, and they had more money to devote to other things that perhaps God knew was necessary for others. But my aunt and uncle, they would have loved to have had kids. And we in this country have thrown away more than 50 million lives. That's probably a low estimate, honestly. The organizations that report abortions, they uh, they don't do such a great job of really putting that info out there. I think they're giving us lowball numbers, and I think that's all intentional. But that's another thing altogether. There's a couple different organizations, the Guttmacher Institute being one, that put out abortion statistics, and none of those organizations put out complete across the board statistics from all the states, and so it's kind of hard to get a real picture, but the number is more than 50 million. And there have been consequences of that widespread child murder in this country. Those are people who they're just gone. They're not here. They're not inventing things. They're not contributing to society. They're not paying taxes. They're not in the workforce. They're not doctors. They're not nurses. They're not caretakers. They're not having kids of their own. They're not stepping up to be good police officers or strong leaders. They're not philanthropists. They're not standing up to defend our country from enemies abroad. This national sin of abortion has had tremendous consequences. The Bible's clear that God hates those who offend or do harm to innocent little ones. Abortion is absolutely disgusting in the eyes of God, and we will be held accountable for it as a nation and as individuals. You see this slogan, my body, my choice, and I heartily agree. As I mentioned, though, the developing human embryo in the womb, the unborn child, that life is not part of the woman's body. Real science demonstrates it's genetically different from mom or dad. It's not her body, so it's not her choice. Now, I do agree with my body, my choice in the context of vaccine mandates and mask mandates. But that's not the point of this video. So let's not get lost on that rabbit trail either. But I think we've established that biblically the unborn child is a human being and aborting it is murder. Which means that abortion, by extension of that principle, is wicked under all circumstances. Yes. Abortion is wicked under the circumstance of rape, a pregnancy caused by rape. We don't kill the child because of the sins of the father. The father may have impregnated a woman by rape. She may be carrying a child that she did not want, but it's still a human life. We don't kill that child because the father committed a heinous sin and crime. And to any ladies in that situation, let me just say my heart goes out to you. That's really hard. Um, I would encourage you to do your best to nurture that child during your pregnancy. And if you're not able to provide for it in the way that you think is necessary, put that child up for adoption. Um, but understand that God allowed that pregnancy to happen. You've been entrusted with that life. At the very least, you need to make sure that that child gets into the hands of people who are going to care for it, nurture it, and raise it up to be uh, a productive member of society. And understand that how you raise that child is going to be the biggest factor in how they turn out. The Bible says, bring up a child in the way it should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So mothers have a tremendous influence on their children, even single mothers. So I would just encourage you, if you're in a situation where you are pregnant by rape, that's a terrible spot to be. Um, Trust God, do the right thing, and you take care of that child. That is a human life, and you are going to be held accountable. Secondly, I do not believe that abortion in the case of incest is acceptable either. That's also wicked. Plenty of healthy and functional children have been born from incest historically. Looking at you, royal families of Europe. Yeah, a lot of these royal families are obsessed with bloodlines and they inbreed on purpose. And sure, there's health defects and all kinds of weirdness that come out of that, but a lot of those individuals can still live ordinary lives. We don't kill a human being on the chance that it could be defective. So, in cases of incest, yes, there's a higher incidence or higher probability that a child could have genetic diseases, but we don't kill a human being on that chance. There have been plenty of genetically defective human beings who have contributed to society, and and that's still a human life. We don't kill it just because it's not going to be perfect. The reality is nobody's genetically perfect anywhere. And the principle that we don't kill the child for the sins of the parents still is at play. Incest is wrong. Um, Initially in the Bible, it was allowed because there was not a genetic load. Humanity was closer to creation and didn't have a lot of genetic defects built up. But eventually, um, God put limits on marriages, and you could not marry near relatives anymore in the scriptures. And that's where we are today because of genetic load, all these genetic defects built up in the human genome. You have a higher chance with close relatives if you have a kid of genetic defects showing up in those offspring. And then finally, risk to the life of the mother. We don't kill a human being because a pregnancy might be risky. Understand that risk is basically, and probability, that's essentially human beings masking our ignorance of the future with a probability. Well, there's a 35% chance that this pregnancy could end with both the mother and the child dying. Well, you don't know how that's going to turn out. God does, you don't. That's the devil's math choosing to abort a baby, which is a human life, in order to possibly save a human life. Possibly save the life of the mother who may not even be at risk at all. Let me point something out here. Every single pregnancy is inherently risky. If you understand what happens during childbirth, there are blood vessels bigger than a garden hose that have to clamp off at just the right time, or the mother will bleed to death in minutes. All pregnancies are inherently risky. We don't kill a human being because a pregnancy might be risky. That's still murder. Now, I am delighted to see that Tennessee is taking the right side on this particular issue. I moved down here very recently at the beginning of the year. I did so for a number of liberty and life related and moral issues, and I am just delighted to be a part of what God is doing. God is doing here in this state of Tennessee. And let me just say that God is going to judge this state based on the choices we make regarding abortion. I want to keep Tennessee abortion free, and I intend to use my voice to the best of my ability to make that clear. God's going to bless this state if we choose to honor Him and protect human life and protect the vulnerable and the unborn. Um, well, thank you for watching this video. I hope it has been thought provoking. Have a great afternoon.